So right now, whether a recovery home can actually operate legally depends more on the personalities of city officials rather than what the law actually says. And that creates significant impact on human life and communities.
Dr. Hunter Foote is going to be testifying via Zoom.
That is correct. Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Doctor, we can hear you very well.
Excellent. Thank you. Chairman Robertson and members of this study committee, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony here today. My name is Dr. Hunter Foote, and I serve as the Executive Director of Vanderburgh Sober Living. We are a national nonprofit organization which provides support to recovery residence operators as well as advocacy in support of recovery housing operations from Maine to California. And as we've heard earlier and belabored a bit, I'll echo a few points from Attorney Neubauer's testimony regarding federal law, as well as just some real world implications in terms of what this means kind of on the ground. And certainly we'll have an opportunity to have some questions. So really what we have found in operating and supporting operators of recovery housing in many different states is it becomes easier to operate and easier to open, and just the environment is so much better when state law aligns with federal law. And as we've discussed earlier today, the federal framework is fairly well settled. Individuals in recovery are protected from the zoning standpoint under the Fair Housing Act as a functional equivalent of a family. So there really isn't the gap at the federal law level. It's a gap at the local level as it relates to these protections that are afforded groups of disabled individuals under the Fair Housing Act. So really, the state doesn't need to create any new rights. We just need the state to make the existing federal protections workable at the ground level. So what this looks like is exactly what we've discussed in the College Park scenario and probably many others that haven't seen the light of day because operators don't want to fight municipalities and they're afraid of zoning violation notices, and not everyone has the capacity to engage in this high-level conversation about federal law and state law and zoning and planning and whether building code applies and in what contexts and all of this. So I hesitate to say that this is an isolated instance of some challenges. I would venture a guess that there are countless more that just haven't gotten up to this level. So we've discussed zoning codes, we've discussed building codes, and ultimately with this disconnect between potential state legislation and the wide variety of definitions and bylaws and codes enacted at the local municipal or county level, there is lack of definition, leaving from a zoning perspective, leaving town planners, zoning boards, and neighbors just guessing at what this is, whether they should be classified as rooming houses or lodging houses or treatment, even though no treatment is offered in traditional level 2 recovery housing. And then, of course, building and fire code requirements come into play as well. So right now, whether a recovery home can actually operate legally depends more on the personalities of city officials rather than what the law actually says. And that creates significant impact on human life and communities. So for residents, we see this will delay the opening or force the closure of recovery housing, which ultimately means fewer safe and sober beds. Individuals in recovery end up in substandard environments like homeless shelters, motels, or unsafe housing, or typically back to the environments that allowed them to use drugs and alcohol in the first place. And for operators in municipalities, this creates problems on both ends. Operators appeal unclear or overtly discriminatory municipal zoning requirements and codes. Municipalities have to fight or choose not to fight and choose not to enforce their rules the way they see them. There are hearings, there's litigation, there's a great deal of expense both on the private side from people that just want to operate supportive housing for individuals in recovery, but as well on the municipal side of things, expending taxpayer dollars fighting things that may not have to be fought if there's more clarity at the state level. So every time we have to fight one of these battles, it's time and money taken away from actually doing the work that operators are called to do and the work that municipal governments, counties, and the state should be doing. So local boards are oftentimes, we're talking about these zoning appeals at the local level. They're being asked to solve a problem that they didn't create and that they're not prepared to fix, and that's under this shroud of complex federal law and court decisions from appellate courts and the intersection of that and state law. And it's very confusing. So this lack of clarity makes operators afraid to open. It makes municipalities afraid to enforce what they can legitimately enforce. And it just destabilizes everything. And as we discussed earlier, it leaves this gap for perhaps the less quality focused operators to open and just skate around and threaten litigation under the Fair Housing Act principles if people try to shut them down. So really, if we can clarify and codify at the state level laws, definitions, and provide this clarity, it will allow the right people to operate these homes successfully and grow. And it will also allow some light to be shown on those who do not operate correctly. There was a comment made earlier about requiring licensure of recovery housing. If the state were to require that recovery homes be licensed, that would potentially run afoul of the Fair Housing Act protections itself, because now the license itself is creating an impediment to these homes opening. What a lot of states have done is require any agency that receives any funding from the state. So this is the prison systems, the jail systems, probation, parole departments, and then any sort of healthcare, state healthcare funded facilities, detoxes, rehabs, CSS, TSS. If everyone that receives $1 of state funding is required to only refer to certified recovery housing, it essentially requires certification without overtly requiring certification and potentially opening the state up for a challenge of that state law. So we've seen that work in Massachusetts. We've seen it work in several other states where the states say, if you're taking $1 of state money for any reason, you must only refer to certified sober living homes. And as such, it effectively requires certification for anyone that wants to receive referrals from the vast majority of referral sources.
And excuse me, Doctor,
Yes, sir.
And where do you stand on that?
I think that is perhaps the most appropriate and level and fair approach to take towards the mandate for certification. It's effective and it works well.
What about those that don't receive any funding?
They would still be allowed to operate, and that is how it works in the states that have enacted legislation that requires this type of referral restriction.
Well, and because our ultimate goal is continuity in what sober living residences are, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So requiring them to meet certain standards, whether they're being referred to from an agency that receives state funding or not, should not be a concern, correct?
That is more of a legal question of whether those standards that are imposed would be reasonable and necessary. I personally wouldn't be opposed to that. I've just seen similar requirements challenged.
And because in Georgia, we have GAR, and in Florida they have FAR, and all these other certifying entities. Mm-hmm. And so as long as there's continuity amongst those requirements, then I think it would be fairly reasonable to transfer those into state policy, whether that be with DBHDD or DHS, as far as certifying these types of residences. And therefore, and again, I don't want to get too deep into the legal side, but I think as long as we're being consistent, that should alleviate any problems of us, of anybody. My primary focus here is getting the bad actors out of this arena and making sure that we have good, clean, safe places for people that are recovered or recovering to be able to live, work, and get their lives back on track. So I think having those kind of standards should solve that problem, right?
I would agree with that, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just to add a concluding remark, if it's appropriate to do so, we see on the ground what causes a lack of supportive housing is largely the lack of clarity. It's not that recovery housing needs funding, which of course it does in many senses, especially getting started up. But my ask to any body of legislature is It's clarity. It's clarity in requirements. It's clarity in expectations. It's fairness in the application of these requirements and expectations across every operator. It's openness for anyone to operate, serving folks of different demographic makeups, of different recovery pathways. But ultimately, it's the lack of clarity, and it's this froth of unknowns and whether the city is going to try to shut me down or what do I do about these notices. That stops the vast majority of people from opening in the first place or growing. And if one thing could happen, it would be that the playing field is well lit and fair to every single person on it. And after that, we could talk about funding and allocating resources and all of that. But really, the conversation should be about how do we make this as transparent as possible and as easy for new operators to understand and to take action on and to follow their dream, which many folks in this field have a dream of operating their own location. And if recovery housing is it, we should make it as easy as possible for everyone to know what is expected of them and to do the right thing in every circumstance. And with that, I'll close. And I thank you very much, Chairman, for your time in this committee and the intentionality behind thinking about this important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Foote. Do you have any questions, Dr. Kirkpatrick? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Foote. Appreciate your testimony.
I appreciate you as well.